Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show Voidcast. This is the 7th episode. I am your host for today, Lenny, and with me is my friend and co-host, Carlos.
Hello, everyone.
Today we are going to discuss the Hungarian movie The Turin Horse from 2011, directed by Béla Tarr. But first of all, I want to wish our fellow sufferers a happy new year, or whatever the pessimist's more appropriate equivalent might be, perhaps a tolerable, bearable year. And let's just hope that we are at least spared from the worst possible outcomes of whatever has been brewing for quite some time, actually, in this malignantly useless world. So yeah, the new year starts off with a new Voidcast, so I guess it could be worse. And if that's not enough for you, if you need an extra dose of unbridled pessimism, check out our interview with John from Antinatalist Advocacy that was released on the 15th of December. Really interesting conversation. I really enjoyed it. And
yeah, me too.
If this interview brought you to our show, then we would like to welcome our new listeners to the show and thank you very much for tuning in. Just my usual disclaimer that I always give. You are probably listening to us on YouTube right now, which is fine. But if you so prefer, you can also find our show on other podcast platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcast, you name them. So just go to linktr.ee/veganvoidcast. So yeah, for the first episode in the new year, we were going to have a very special guest on the show, but unfortunately this didn't work out as planned. So we had to come up with a plan B at the last minute. And fortunately, that's what we did. We had another excellent suggestion by Carlos, namely The Turin Horse by Béla Tarr, which you might remember Carlos briefly mentioned in our interview with Lawrence, but perhaps it makes sense if he gives you a short introduction to the work of Béla Tarr and his screenwriter, László Krasznahorkai, first.
Yes, it's well, I was the one who suggested it in a sort of off the cuff moment, just spontaneously suggested it as a bleakly pessimistic movie, and then it felt bad if we didn't then talk about it in a bit more detail. Anyway, the Turin Horse and it's directed by Béla Tarr with a screenplay by László Krasznahorkai. I try my best with these names. The careers of these two creators and artists are linked. So Béla Tarr is a filmmaker and a film director, and Krasznahorkai is mainly a novelist. But they've collaborated together in the sense that Krasznahorkai has written quite a lot of screenplays together or for Béla Tarr to direct. They started a collaboration in the mid-'80s when Béla Tarr was looking for new things to shoot or a new direction for where he was taking his filmmaking. And then he stumbled upon Krasznahorkai's novel, Satan Tango, which Tarr thought was, kind of just resonated with his vision for what cinema should be. At the time, Béla Tarr was already experimenting with this kind of cinematic vision, which includes very long takes. Usually a scene is composed of a single take. So, there's there are no cuts. So the cuts usually imply that you omit a passage of time. Whereas when Béla Tarr directs, every scene is usually a single take. And this is reflected also in the way that Krasznahorkai writes. And I've read quite a few of his novels where, for example, for each chapter is a single paragraph. So if you were to open one of these books, it would just look like a giant block of black. And as in, each page would just be black text all, just from the top left of the page to the bottom right of the page is text, no paragraphs, no line breaks. And this kind of reflected by Béla Tarr's directing style. Anyway, the first film they did together was Damnation in 1988. This was not based on a book by Krasznahorkai. This was a screenplay that Krasznahorkai wrote specifically for this movie. But most people, and then they started collaborating after this film in 1988. Most people would consider the peak of their collaboration to be Satan Tango, so the book that Béla Tarr read back in 85. And this is a 7.5-hour movie. Honestly, I've watched it twice. People complain about the length of a 7.5-hour movie, and then they go and binge a 12 one-hour episode TV show over a weekend, and that's like 12 hours instead of 7.5. It doesn't really feel that long, it's just a long movie. I mean, you can take breaks if you watch it, Most people do. Even when they show it on cinemas, they take breaks. So you can too. You could just watch it over a couple of evenings, perhaps. But yeah, that's a great movie. Sat and Tango, 1994. My favorite collaboration of them is Werkmeister Harmonies in 2000. That's based on a book by Krasznahorkai called The Melancholy of Resistance, which is actually a much better title, in my opinion. And this movie, The Turin Horse from 2011, is their final collaboration because Béla Tarr said this was going to be his last movie. He had a producer who he worked closely with, and it's very difficult to fund this type of cinema. You need to rely on kind of arts grants and grants from here and there. And his producer was the only person who was kind of keeping Béla Tarr making movies, and that producer unfortunately passed away. And Béla Tarr just said, "Well, by myself, I cannot go through the hassle of spending 5, 6, 7 years trying to raise money to make a movie." So he basically retired from filmmaking. So this was the last collaboration. Meanwhile, Krasznahorkai himself is a very successful author. He's been translated in multiple languages, publishes a lot, and writes a lot because, as I told you, his chapters are very dense in text. He lives in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, but he has traveled a bit all over the world, and he's still writing, still publishing. And I think this is a reflection of the fact that you don't need necessarily a big budget to write a book, whereas to make a movie you need a big budget, and there's a lot of considerations besides just the creative drive.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carlos, for this introduction. So I do think it makes sense to talk a bit about the title and the reference in the title. A torinói law, the Turin Horse in English, is of course a reference to a story or an anecdote about the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who spent a lot of time at various places, mainly for health reasons, including in Turin. And in early 1889, I think, he suffered some sort of mental breakdown in Turin, and he wrote a series of very confused letters to a number of notable people who were then very concerned about him and quickly escorted him back to Switzerland. And this Turin Horse is a reference to an anecdote that was first, I think, publicized or first brought to greater attention in a 1930 biography of Nietzsche, who had health problems. And to this day, it's not quite clear what the reason was for his mental breakdown. For a long time, people speculated it might have to do with some sort of syphilis, or maybe in more recent years, people think it might have been a brain tumor or something like that. It's not, we'll probably never have an answer. But yeah, as I said, in 1930, a writer by the name of Erich Podach presented this anecdote, which I'm going to read out to you now. On January 3rd, when Nietzsche has just left his house, he sees at a carriage stand in the Piazza Carlo Alberto in Turin a tired old nag, a tired old horse being tormented by a brutal coachman. Pity overcomes him. Sobbing, he throws himself protectively around the neck of the tortured animal. He collapses. Fortunately, at that moment, Fino appears. So Davide Fino was Nietzsche's landlord at that time in Turin. Attracted to the scene by the gathering crowds, he recognizes his tenant and leads him with great difficulty back up to this apartment. And yeah, so this anecdote went on to have a significant influence and provided a lot of inspiration to authors, including like Thomas Mann and Gottfried Benn at that time. And in the 1970s, an Italian writer by the name of Anacleto Verrecchia was actually able to identify the exact source of that anecdote, which goes back to an anonymously published article in the journal Nuova Antologia, published in September 1900, so shortly after Nietzsche's death. And in that article, the anonymous journalist writes that Fino Nietzsche's landlord, rescued his tenant from the hands of two police officers who reported that they had found the foreigner by the arcades of the university, clinging tightly to the neck of a horse and refusing to let go. So, yeah, make of that what you will. The most recent articles I've found on this story were very skeptical of its veracity, but pointed out that there are some interesting parallels. One article even called it a meme. Like this horse story has kind of went its own way and got a life of its own, and there are interesting literary parallels. For example, with I think the first part, the fifth chapter of the first part of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, where Raskolnikov dreams how he, as a little boy full of compassion, witnesses a very gruesome scene where a horse is basically beaten to death. So we have these parallels, but there are other parallels as well. In any case, we're here dealing with a work of fiction. So this is, of course, important to keep in mind. So we have a great deal of artistic license. Of course, we don't have to stay true to the facts here. So this is just an artistic interpretation of what may have happened to Nietzsche in Turin in January 1889. However, it is indeed a significant anecdote, a significant story, because this is not just a random philosopher displaying a random act of compassion. Oh, how adorable. No, this is coming from someone who, in spite of his ill health and generally weak constitution, praised strength above all else and utterly despised everything he considered weak, and who dedicated his life basically to the deconstruction and the demolition of compassionate ethics, which he regarded as some sort of slave morality. So this is also one aspect that is supposed to be illustrated by this anecdote. And of course, it marks the beginning of the end for Nietzsche, who never recovered from this breakdown and was dependent on the care of his friends and later of his family for the last years of his life. So he
I don't think that story is true at all.
Yeah,
but it's a good story. It's a great way to explain it. It's also because it's such a contrast to his writings. Yeah,
exactly. And I think this is what makes this story so it's kind of inspiring and so attractive, especially for fellow artists and writers, like regardless of its actual historical veracity. So yeah, this was just something that I wanted to point out. All right, normally we start our film discussions by reading out a short synopsis of the movie, but to be honest, I didn't really like the ones that I found on the internet. The IMDb synopsis reads: a rural farmer is forced to confront the mortality of his faithful horse. Rotten Tomatoes says a monumental windstorm and an abused horse's refusal to work or eat signals the beginning of the end for a poor farmer and his daughter. I don't think they really capture the essence of the movie. No. So I wrote a short one myself, which I'm going to read out to you. This movie chronicles the hard and bleak life of a poor aging man, his daughter, and the horse in the barren countryside. We see their tedious daily struggles and their impending and inescapable demise as they slowly but surely lose their means of subsistence and their hope in a relentlessly hostile world. Anything to add to that, Carlos?
No, I think that's a really good one. But the plot is not really what's important about it.
Exactly. So we're not going to give you a scene-by-scene analysis. This would be simply incredibly boring to give and to listen to, I suppose. But just so that you get an idea. So the movie starts with the anecdote that I just presented to you, with a couple of slight modification, and this sometimes also serves as the synopsis of the movie, even though Nietzsche himself, of course, doesn't appear anywhere in the movie. But it ends with the sentence, "Of the horse we know nothing," and then it immediately cuts to the first scene, very impressive scene, and the first thing that we see is indeed a horse. So it is implied that this is, the horse that Nietzsche encountered in Turin. And yeah, so as I said, very impressive scene. We see this horse drawing a cart and like struggling against the storm on a lonely road with a coachman sitting on the cart. And I found this also the horse himself very expressive, like with his blinders on, and I think a lot of atmosphere, a lot of emotion is transported there. And this, like, just a quick heads up, I don't think this movie really is for everyone. I don't think everyone will be able to enjoy this movie to its fullest extent, but my recommendation is watch this first scene, which you can also find on YouTube, and see if it resonates with you, and if there's something that you find aesthetically appealing or beautiful about it. And if you do, then you're in for a good ride, so to speak. But yeah, my first impression was, okay, this deals with this abused horse apparently, and the history of the horse. So maybe I have to settle now for 2.5 hours of
horse abuse,
animal abuse, like animal ethics and morality surrounding that. But the movie actually is not about that. So the coachman eventually arrives at home, and normally also in literature, even in ancient literature, when there are descriptions of very harsh conditions outside, like the storm that features very, very prominently in this movie, it is usually done, or not usually, but often done to emphasize or to contrast with the coziness inside. But this movie is completely devoid of any kind of coziness, as we will see later. So I think it makes sense to very briefly talk about this very small cast of characters in this movie, Carlos. So we have we know very, very little about these characters. In most cases, we don't even know their name, but these are very simple, very unpretentious, ordinary people. There are no heroes and no villains, and essentially just 3 main characters. So we have the coachman, who is named Ohlsdorfer, played by Janusz Derzi, who is a poor, aging, rural person. We don't actually know what he does for a living.
Yeah, I think it's sort of implied that he has multiple occupations. I mean, he's a coachman in the town, so I guess he would use his horse and cart to kind of move things around and get paid for it. And then he seems to be able to make some brandy himself. It's very hard to tell how he actually makes his money outside of the horse.
And we don't actually see him at work. We see him ready for work and return from work, but the work itself is not shown. This is not the focus of the movie, but it is heavily implied that he lived this kind of very rough and austere life for close to 6 decades now. And one thing that I didn't really noticed the first time I watched the movie, I watched it a second time then, is he seems to have lost the use of his right arm. So he's a bit of a lame horse himself, right? And another interesting thing is we know the name, like at least the last name of the man who is referred to as Ohlsdorfer. And as a citizen of Hamburg, Germany, I immediately had to think of the Ohlsdorfer Friedhof, which is a very large cemetery, actually the largest rural cemetery in the world, which is located just north of Hamburg. So probably a deliberate reference there. But we never know his daughter's name, and I think in the script she's just referred to as the girl. So we don't get a lot of background there. What I found a bit unsettling is the way he looks at her at sometimes, like the way his gaze follows her around. Not quite sure what to make of it. There's very, very little communication between these two. Very, very little dialogue too, and not a single word of affection. Not a single gesture of love or anything, other than the fact that she helps him get dressed and she cooks for them. But other than that, very minimal interaction, as if they kind of consciously try or subconsciously try to reduce the number of words they say to each other.
Yes, I mean it also says that and this is what we see in the movie, each day is like the day before, and this constant drudgery of everyday life means that they don't need to communicate, because since every day is exactly like the day that went on before, there's nothing to talk about. It's just surviving. Literally what they're doing is surviving and going through their daily rituals. So there's nothing. I mean, there are a few things that happen in the movie that are kind of out of the ordinary every day, which is why it's a movie and not just a kind of a fictional documentary of sorts.
And we got to these in a bit, yeah.
Yeah, there's a few events, and they do comment on those events, but otherwise it's changing clothes, washing clothes, sewing clothes that are ripped, putting new holes in the belt when they get too thin, cooking, eating, watching the wind outside, taking care of the horse, just tasks. So there's nothing to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have a third main character, which is actually the horse, played by the horse named Ricci, who's even mentioned in the opening credits. So this is quite interesting to mention like an animal along with the human actors. And of course, I'm not implying that this animal is an actor himself, but I do think it's quite impressive how the director manages to convey such emotion through the horse alone. And yeah, this horse is mainly treated as a commodity. We see that this family is completely dependent on the horse for income, or for whatever meager income they are able to scrape up. And yeah, we see how it is sometimes mistreated by Oldstoffer. So when the horse doesn't want to move, he whips the horse, and it is treated more kindly by the daughter. But I do think that this is mainly done to ensure that the horse feels well enough to keep working. So mainly just an instrumental sort of kindness, you could say. And most of the time it's just shut in the stable and has to dwell there in darkness.
Yeah. Although to be fair, they the father and daughter treat each other a bit like that too.
Yeah. So
I'm not saying they're abusive, but their relationship is one of pure need.
Exactly, of like need and like helping each other survive, because one needs the other to survive. Basically.
Essentially, yeah. So the daughter has the two arms,
yeah.
So she can help the dad to kind of put on his work clothes and help around the house and do tasks. And of course, the dad is the one who provides the income with this mysterious work, which might be as a coachman.
Mm-hmm.
But they mistreat or have a very kind of instrumental relationship with the horse, but they do the same for each other.
Yeah, exactly. So so these are basically the main characters. Then we have another interesting side character who appears just for one scene, or like one camera shot to be precise, just for about 7 minutes, and then is never seen or heard of again. So he just knocks on the door and wants to get some brandy. So we see that these people are like also addicted to alcohol, and the alcohol helps them get through the day. And this is not just true for the Oldstoffer family, but apparently also for the other rural.
I mean, I think you're being a bit unkind. I mean, addicted to alcohol. I mean, I think in those circumstances, that's the only thing they have.
Yeah,
alcohol.
I'm not blaming them.
Yeah,
or anything, but we
there's
see
nothing.
them.
There's literally nothing. They live like in the middle of nowhere, and in the middle of nowhere, in a very hostile nowhere. At that, it's not just a boredom. It's literally a world that's trying to end them.
Yes.
Anyway, so let's talk about the neighbor.
So he basically appears and then completely unprompted gives an extremely like crushing, pessimistic or more nihilistic monologue, and then leaves again. So this is also another very impressive scene. He talks about how everything has been debased, and how there are no gods and no God, and so kind of hints at the impending doom. He also mentions that the town that Oldstoffer earns his money in was completely swept away, by the wind, and the wind is another absolutely essential aspect. I was tempted to name the wind as another main character, actually,
Yes.
because it is so prominent. There's very, very little use of music in the movie, which we'll get to in a bit, but you almost constantly hear the wind, this very strong wind howling, which makes the already rough life of these people even worse. And so yeah, we have to do with an ominous force from above that is not very caring, that is even hostile to these people.
Yeah. I mean, there's on the speech that the neighbor gives, unprompted, I should say, he accuses both God and humanity.
Yeah.
And obviously the humans we have on screen, and there's a few more humans coming up after the neighbor visits as well. But I would say the wind would be related to the presence of God, or in this case, like a very hostile God that's trying to kind of just kind of blow everything off the face of the earth. And it's apparently already blown away this town. And the neighbor's kind of hinting at the kind of a broader apocalypse. And the neighbor kind of introduces this as being both blamed on human actions and this higher force, which could be God. And so it's the two together, but the wind will not last for the entire movie, though.
Yeah, we get to that in a bit. So I think now you have an impression of what to expect from the characters and from the overall structures. But as Carlos just mentioned, a couple of events do happen, and I think we should talk about these as well. So this movie basically, as we said, is set in a barren valley most of the time, and at first, on the first day, they can still go about their daily routines and their tedious tasks as usual. But on the second day already, we see how the horse stops cooperating. Like Oldstoffer tries to spur it on, but in vain, and then he has to get back home again, and so can't go to work. So this is basically the first sign that their existence is in danger now.
Yes, it's telling that, for example, the movie's over 2 hours long, and the neighbor arrives around 1 hour into the movie. I mean, I think it's almost exactly 1 hour into the movie, and that kind of marks the confirmation that it's not just their impression that the horse is not capable of working and things are kind of going wrong. The neighbor arrives at this kind of 1 hour mark to kind of mark the confirmation that everything outside the house is also going ending. I think ending would be a good word.
Yeah,
there's ending and closing. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also a certain type of apocalyptic feeling throughout the movie, but not in the sense of, oh, there's now some huge catastrophe. It's not like the world goes out with a bang or an explosion or anything, but just a small flame dying out. Basically, I think this is a very fitting image, and we'll also see this towards the end of the movie. But this is kind of the feeling that is conveyed throughout the movie.
I'm pretty sure that overall the film gets darker and darker as it goes. Not in actually darker. Like the light, there's less and less light in each shot as we go through the days, until of course it gets to the end. Not
just in terms of cinematography, but also in terms of how the people, Oldstoffer and his daughter, interact with each other, which is already like they have minimal communication, but at the end they also kind of avoid looking at each other and so forth. So it becomes not just darker, but also colder in a way. So anyway, this neighbor, they have a long, well, it's not a conversation, it's a monologue, and there's a lot of kind of Nietzschean ideas in this neighbor's speech. He talks about, he's critiquing mediocrity, and that the people who are in power are very mediocre and sneaky, and they kind of acquired everything in a sneaky, underhanded fight, and they took it from the noble people, and there's been like a loss of values and the descent into moral corruption. But
it seems sort of hollow the way he talks about it, because he himself is very, let's say, he's very reliant on his brandy to get by.
Mhm.
He's physically frail because he needs a walking stick to get to the house. He's not a powerful man by any means. So he just seems like a bit like Nietzsche himself in a way, in the way he ended his days in decay himself. Yeah.
There is a very short but extremely insightful interview with Béla Tarr on the movie. And in that interview, Béla Tarr refers to this visitor, who's, I think, named Bernhard in the Hungarian script, as some sort of Nietzschean shadow, basically. So yeah, there's that. And for the third day, basically, the movie, I think we forgot to mention this. This movie is divided into 6 days of about half an hour each. So on the third day, so a bit more than an hour into the movie, we see how this horse not only refuses to work and to cooperate, but also refuses to eat. So
Yes.
we see a lot of, like, we spend a lot, an inordinate amount of time watching people eat. And I think we should mention at this point that whenever Oldstoffer and his daughter eat their meal, they just have one meal a day, and their entire meal every day consists of just one potato for each of them, which they eat then with their bare hands, and in the case of Oldstoffer, just with his one hand. And it's just like miserable to watch, honestly.
Yes. On the other hand, they're vegans.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's not exactly my,
or at least as far as eating goes.
Not exactly my
not the greatest diet. Yeah.
of a well-planned vegan diet. So I'm sure they're not getting the
I don't think they're vegan by option. Yeah, and they eat in a very peculiar fashion, because they get the potatoes off the boil, so they're extremely hot, and they peel the skin off with their bare hands. They have no utensils, and you can see that they're so eager to eat that they burn their fingers as they take the skin off. So which just shows like complete destitution.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it also hints at this kind of it's kind of closing down. And he was saying that the horse refuses to eat. To me, as somebody who is a non-practicing screenwriter, at least that's my training in university. Usually movies begin with, of course, you need to introduce characters and the setup to the audience. So you start by creating all these options. We're here, the characters, and here's the setup. And then, of course, the audience is going to think, oh, there's so many possibilities in this movie. I wonder what this person is going to do with this situation, or how they're going to react to this other character doing something. So you set up a movie as a way to create all these possibilities, and then you kind of start narrowing it down. And then there's usually like a climax and the resolution where you finally say, see, I gave you all these possibilities, and then these are the possibilities I picked as the most exciting one for you to watch, or the most exciting or dramatic, or any of those kind of words that make people watch a movie or stick through a narrative. Whereas in this movie, it starts with very few possibilities already. I mean, there's a house, and that's it. There's these two characters we know very little about, and we'll know pretty much the same throughout the movie. We're not going to learn that much about them. There's a couple of visitors, not like a couple of events of people visiting, and that's it. I mean, the movie just starts with very little, and it keeps taking stuff out essentially until the end, where there's nothing left. Where it kind of, in that way, it mirrors in other movies, because all movies end with a black screen, and so there's this one. Except this one, it just kind of funnels things towards this inevitability of nothingness, whereas most movies just show you a big world and then ask you to take part in this world. And the horse refusing to eat is just another example of this closing down of possibilities. So it's a quite unusual, dramatic movement, but of course, it's exactly the reason why we're speaking about this movie in this podcast.
Yeah, it is, because it is not, of course, explicitly antinatalist or anything, but I do think it is a deeply pessimistic movie. It is incredibly bleak in a way, and in a way that I think might appeal to not only to me but also to our audience.
Yes, so. I mean, there's no like killings in this movie or people being incredibly cruel to each other. So it's not pessimistic in that sense of look at existence and how people are terrible to each other, and it's pessimistic in a sort of fundamental way. That there's literally no hope except the continuation of things, and until they end.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So we see these people kind of subsisting at the lowest and barest level of existence, like just the bare existence itself. And this is, I think, being confronted with this is quite an experience. Like what we see here is like this movie is of course characterized by a certain sort of monotony, but not quite the monotony that we are used to, not this wage slave living in an industrialized apartment block working a 9-to-5 job of like monotony in a modern society. But this is as I said, this existence at a very fundamental level, and we see this kind of their struggle for survival just for the sake of doing all the same tedious tasks the next day again. So it's just pointless survival for the sake of survival. And once you like question the value of that, then which is usually taken for granted to be a positive thing, right? But once you see this, you do all the stuff you do today just to do the same stuff again, perhaps even with greater difficulty the next day. I think this is just illustrates like what kind of predicament we're trapped in, basically.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent reflection of that, and that's why I mentioned it in Lawrence's interview as a kind of a spontaneous and I thought deeply pessimistic movies. These people are essentially doing the same thing over and over again, except it's worse every time. It's it's entropic, and for some of our listeners, this might resonate.
Yeah, we hope so. So on the third day, as we said, this horse refuses to eat. But another thing happens, another quite important event happens like halfway through the movie. And we see a band of outsiders, a band of foreigners perhaps, approach, who are then characterized as gypsies. I'm sure that is the politically correct term. But they just want to fetch some water from the well outside the house. So Oldstoffer and his daughter, they have a well which they fetch water from every morning. And they just want to drink some water. And they are then chased away by first by his daughter and then by Oldstoffer himself, like wielding an axe. And then they send out some threats and say, we'll be back, the water is ours and the earth is ours and you're dead. So very threatening in a way, even though no actual like physical violence is happening or something. But one of the old people in the band gives Oldstoffer's daughter a book, and this is one of the scenes that I've found very fascinating. So because I have a penchant for old and obscure books anyway. And I'm just going to read out what Oldstoffer's daughter reads out to us from the book with some difficulty. So she says, "Since in holy places only those things are allowed, the practice of which serves the veneration of the Lord, and everything is forbidden that is not fitted for the holiness of the place, and since holy places have been violated by the great injustice of actions that have taken place within them that scandalize the congregation, for this very same reason, no service unto the Lord can be held there until, through a ceremony of penitence, these aforementioned injustices have been put to rights. The bishop says to the congregation, the Lord was with you. Morning will become night. Night will be at an end." So, a very like fascinating passage about how religion is no longer permitted, is no longer allowed because humans were too bad for this. And I tried to track down the exact passage, but it turns out this was actually
You
an
did,
original text by
you were
László
baited.
Krasznahorkai, yeah. But Béla Tarr refers to it as some sort of anti-Bible and says it's about how priests close churches because people are sinning. We have to close the churches. We have to tear them down. So it's very interesting because very often when you find like descriptions of people, like rural people living in these very equally poor conditions, that religion plays a very strong role in their lives, and religion is what keeps them going and what kind of binds them together, maybe also with the community or something. But we see that like this source of hope is not present in the movie.
Even that is taken away.
Yeah, exactly. So all the things that you can say, well, this is something that might make their life enjoyable. Like you're on the countryside, maybe the weather is nice. No, it's not. Maybe the countryside itself is nice. No, it's not. It's just a barren land, nothing, with a lonely tree and nothing else. And maybe they have some sort of fulfilling family life. No, they don't. So all these possible
maybe the house is warm and cozy. No, you can't have that.
And maybe you say, okay, but maybe look at the very simple pleasures of life, like get some sleep, and then maybe you eat something. But as we saw, there is no enjoyment at all when they eat. It's just a basic necessity, and there is nothing even remotely pleasurable about that. And even, the same can be said about their ritual of drinking brandy. First one each morning, and later two each morning. It's just like taken as like medicine, like simply to get through the day. There's no enjoyment at all, and I mean this should not be underestimated. It is a movie where the protagonist, like, there's no pleasure at all, or anything that people have a positive association with in this movie. There's not even a single smile from the protagonist, and they don't even greet each other when he comes home from work or something. So it is indeed very bleak and cold, and you very rarely see this in the cinema or on screen.
You're welcome, Lenny, for my recommendation. Okay, so so this is the midway point. There's 6 days, we know this much, and this is the end of the third day with the anti-Bible being read very slowly. Then we come upon the fourth day, where everything that was bad becomes worse. The well is dry, which means that probably the Romanis took all the water. There's some water left, but the horse is not drinking it either. So this is an escalation of his refusal to eat. So, when an animal stops drinking water, it's probably the end. The end is coming. So Ohlsdorfer makes a bold decision, and this would be like, I would say, the last sliver of hope in the entire movie, where Ohlsdorfer decides to depart the farm. And the daughter and himself, they pack this push cart with some of their belongings, and they bring. Curiously, the horse is actually walking now that he doesn't have to pull anything. And just goes alongside them. It's the daughter actually pulling the cart.
Yeah, exactly. Rules are reversed now.
Yes, but they take the horse, which is sort of a little bit of kindness, I would say, and they go up this. Well, we told you about the long shots, so they definitely walk and very slowly, because it's a lame man and a very old horse, and the only healthy animal in the shot is the girl, and she has to pull along the push cart, and they go up this hill very slowly with the wind. Don't forget the wind. And they go up the hill and they disappear, and the shot stays, and we know something's going to happen, and then they come back down the hill again.
Yeah, so the camera doesn't follow them. It just stays the same, and we see them basically return to where they came from. So
there's no explanation, and I don't think for the purpose of this movie you need any explanation. There was a little burst of hope from Ohlsdorfer, which came to nothing.
This is if you take a look at the classical model of drama, of tragedy, there's usually at this point some sort of false glimpse of hope, and this is what we saw here. Yeah, so now they're basically trapped in their old house, but without a working horse and without water now.
Yeah, and of course they don't. As you can imagine, it's a farm, but there are no crops. There's nothing can grow with the wind like that. On the fifth day, and we should say that these days, I mean, I told you that the movie keeps getting compressed. The possibilities are shorter. The light is darker. There's fewer things happening on screen, and in the same way, if you mapped out the length of each day gets smaller. So the first day is very long. The second day, I told you that when the neighbor visits on the second day, that happens around 1 hour into the movie, which is sort of just before the midpoint, and there's still 4 days to go. So each day is shorter than the previous day. There are fewer things that can even happen or that you can imagine happening on each day. So on the fifth day, the horse is obviously dying, and they remove the reins from the horse. So we can imagine that this horse will never work again. That possibility is completely closed. Suddenly, it's very dark. Not just dark as in it's nighttime, but it's supposed to be daytime, but there's darkness just besides the wind. It's like as if the sun itself had been extinguished.
Yeah. And they even comment on that. Like one of the very few remarks that they make is, what is with this darkness?
Yeah, and even the light you'd expect to come from, say, a lamp or a match on fire, that light is not as strong as it should be. So even the possibility of light is being extinguished.
Yeah, and on another note, the storm is over now. So it's just not just the dark of the night, but it's also now the silence that we this deafening silence that we hear.
Yes, I mean, because obviously you're not watching the movie, but the wind is pretty much present in every shot. Even with the door closed, you can always hear the wind outside, and now it's gone. It's just darkness. So if we want to continue what we are assuming, talking about God and destroying the world, God has done the wind has destroyed everything it needs to destroy, and now it's the sun itself shutting down.
Yeah. So this is the fifth day, and the sixth day is basically just serves as an epilogue. So we see Ohlsdorfer and his daughter in a dimly lit house. I mean, where the sun is not shining anymore, where they can't even use their lamps anymore. Even the embers are dying, and likewise for this reason they have no option to boil their usual meal, their potatoes. So now they have their raw potatoes in front of them, and now even Ohlsdorfer and his daughter refuse to eat. Now they just sitting there and waiting for the time to be over. So this is a very impressive but also very haunting scene that we see there.
Yeah, I mean it's a very tragic and haunting movie. It's a movie where there's no violence happening.
There's no action at all. Yeah,
no action. I mean, the most action you get is when the band of Romani gypsies come and Ohlsdorfer wards them off with the axe, but they don't actually get into an actual confrontation. It's just the presence of each other, but still it manages with this kind of unrelenting bleakness, I would say.
Yeah. So this is, and then of course the movie cuts to black, and then credits roll.
Like every other movie. At least in that regard, it's like every other movie.
With the difference that we don't hear a nice pop song playing during the closing credits or anything, and it's just silence and just a very minimalist approach, not only to the cinematography but also to the editing. In the end, it's just a white script on black background, and it seems to have been a very small cast of people involved in making this movie. But one person involved with the movie we should definitely mention, and this is the one responsible for the soundtrack. So this is a soundtrack by Mihai Vig, and this is featured prominently several times throughout the movie. So there is some music, but it is kind of always the same. It's just very melancholic strings with organs, and it's repeated several times throughout the movie. So it creates a very hypnotic feel that kind of draws you into the movie. And it's upon my second watch, I noticed that this is actually very skillfully use this sequence. Like sometimes it blends in with the wind or the other sounds, and sometimes just certain passages from the soundtrack are used, but it's basically the same, like the same old story, the same old dieselbe alte Leier, as we say in German, like the same tune, the same old tune playing again, and this is heard at least 10 times, I think, throughout the movie.
It's I would say it's a sort of emotional landscape type music rather than emphasizing specific actions or events. So music in movies is usually used as a way to tell the audience what they're supposed to feel like. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is exciting. Oh, this is romantic. Oh, this is dramatic. This is just it's sort of like the wind. It's just another thing layered on top. It has no specific meaning to the scene it's being played in that sense. It just kind of carries some scenes and just provides a sort of a color or a filter for the scene. Yeah,
and in any case, like it underlines this monotony and this like this bleakness of the movie. Like I can't say it enough, but it's probably the bleakest work of cinema that I've seen so far.
Oh, that you've seen, yes, so far. But this part, there's still quite a lot of episodes in 2024.
Okay, so I'm really
all the recommendations I have.
And a few more things that I think we should mention about the movie. So it is in a way monotonous and repetitive, but this is handled in a very skillful way too. So the repetitions are definitely there and are felt, but are kind of noticeable and significant enough to keep the viewer engaged with the movie. Like I've seen them like do this or that chore, or like eat potatoes 3 times, but I'm gonna watch them do this a 4th time too. So
yeah, and also they eat potatoes differently each time.
Yeah, and speaking of insignificant variations, there's a wonderful quote by Arthur Schopenhauer that immediately came to my mind, which I would like to read out. It is truly unbelievable how vacuously and meaninglessly viewed from the outside, and how dismally and insensibly viewed from the inside, life flows away for the vast majority of human beings. It is a feeble yearning and a torment, a dreamlike whirl through the 4 ages of life, through to death, accompanied by a series of trivial things. They are like mechanical clocks that are wound up and go without knowing why.
And of course, this aligns with contemporary neuroscience as well.
Yeah, it does. Whenever someone is begotten and born, the clock of human life is wound again, so it can play the same hurdy-gurdy that has already been played countless times, movement by movement, beat by beat, with insignificant variations. And I think this is something that this movie does a fantastic job of highlighting.
Yeah, this movie, supposedly it's related to that Nietzsche incident, but I would say this movie is a Schopenhauerian revenge on Nietzsche, or a counter-argument on Nietzsche. Yeah,
it is indeed, because Nietzsche in his early years was very fascinated by Schopenhauer and his philosophical pessimism, but then kind of tried very, very hard to come up with a life-affirming alternative solution to it. And some people have actually tried to come up with a Nietzschean interpretation of this movie. Like, does this movie inspire you to overcome your limitations and weaknesses and make the best of your lives? I'm not quite sure. So I think this point goes to Schopenhauer here. But one thing that it does is, and that is also very characteristic. So when we take a look at how people deal with their problems, like, for example, the horse doesn't cooperate, you whip it, and it still doesn't cooperate, so you just whip it another time. Or, this option doesn't work, doesn't matter, there's no alternative, just do the same again. Like, they leave the house and come back to the same house again after the escape. So it's like this lack of alternatives that they have. Yeah.
The only hopeful thing about this movie resides outside it, and it is the fact that it got made.
Yeah.
given the current artistic landscape of filmmaking.
And also, especially in Hungary, because apparently the release of the movie was got delayed because there were some conflicts with the Hungarian government and so forth.
Yeah, there always are. So I think that's the only hopeful thing is that it got made, and that Béla Tarr and Krasznahorkai got to work together. When I expect to be one last time, because Béla Tarr's retirement looks like it's a real one. This movie's 12 years old, and I mean Béla Tarr's still young enough that he could still be directing. He's in his late 60s, I think, so he could definitely still be directing. But it looks like his retirement is a definite one. I would say, I mean, if listeners like this movie, I would recommend, of course, Satan Tango and Werkmeister Harmonies. The latter is my personal favorite. But I felt that this one was more relevant to the podcast because of its kind of very strong connotations and kind of relations to the pessimistic philosophy.
Yeah, and also because on Voidcast 5, we talked about human extinction and the end of the world. And this is also, as I said, an apocalyptic movie, but in a completely, like, in a reversed way. Like, we see how like it's basically the 6 states of creation, but reversed. Like, we see how things are taken away from them, and at the end they have no fire, they have no water, they have no light, and just like gradually run out of these things. So also like a nice contrast with like the other scenarios that we presented to you on the show before.
Not covered by Emile P. Torres, by the way. He never talks about the wind. He never talks about the wind in his book.
Yeah, so just a couple of concluding remarks I'd like to make. So, as I said, it's a bit of an acquired taste, and I suppose that many people, and I also found this on in reviews on the internet, might actually find it boring. So it's just not for everyone. Like just like philosophical pessimism isn't for everyone, and you got to be receptive to it and be patient with it and generous with your time and attention. But yeah, it's definitely a rewarding experience. So this is a movie that has to be experienced. You can't just read like a summary. You have to experience it.
I would say, I mean, as somebody who's actually watched a Béla Tarr movie in the cinema, that this is the sort of thing that would work really well in the cinema, because then you have to pay attention, and you'll get. I mean, if you like looking at your phone while you're watching it, you're split between the two worlds, your real world, which is hard to call the mobile phone world the real world, but you know what I mean, and the space of the movie. I think for this one, I think that's fine for some movies, but because they might be close, like the reality that's being depicted on the screen might be very close to the reality being depicted on the small screen, but they might belong to the same general world. But this movie is very metaphorical in that sense. It creates its own specific space, and not just space, but time, and different sense of time. And so I would say watch it with that kind of mood where you put the phone away, just sit and watch. Theater would be best, of course, but alone is fine. Just make sure you kind of get into that time and space that this movie is going to give you.
Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely a way to really appreciate also the movie and its very peculiar aesthetics that make you feel like everything you do feels like a chore. But this movie does it in a way that is also kind of, in a weird way, enjoyable. So yeah, definitely something. And I noticed that this movie is kind of the polar opposite of a TikTok video, basically, which is usually short and colorful and full of excitement and lots of visual stimuli and like people making all kinds of exaggerated grimaces, and sometimes there are a lot of words and stuff crammed into a short video, which is usually very easy to follow and equally easily forgettable. But this is, like, as I said, it's a very long piece of art. It's shot in black and white. It's very monotonous. It's full of bleakness, very, very little dialogue, minimal emotional expressions, and not a lot is happening, and even less is explained. But this movie will, as it did for me, I think, will haunt you for quite a while. And if you liked the movie Aniara, which we presented to you a couple of months ago on Voidcast number 3, there are a couple of interesting similarities. For example, the way the movie is divided into different chapters. For Aniara, of course, these chapters cover not just a day, but several years at times. And then this one character giving a completely unprompted but absolutely brilliant monologue. Also another interesting parallel. In Aniara, it was the astronomer. And also the ending, like where the light goes out. The final scenes of Aniara, I think, can be compared with what we see in the Turin Horse as well. Like this slow loss, not only of light, but also of hope. I think this is something that these two movies definitely have in common. So they end on a very like bleak and hopeless note as well.
Okay. Well, I have nothing else to talk about related to this movie, unless maybe outside the format of a podcast, if we were just chatting about the movie, I'm sure we could go on for a long while. So I still have more recommendations. Don't worry, Lenny. Don't worry.
Great.
Listeners.
But we are always open to other suggestions as well. So this is not a pure movie discussion podcast. We have a lot of plans for this year as well. So feel free to share our suggestions with you. And there's one person that I would like to recommend this movie in particular, and it's my friend Andrew, who I know is very fond of these black and white aesthetics and of the use of monotony and repetition as a stylistic device in art. So definitely check this one out, Andrew. This is going to be right up your alley.
All right. So that's everything from us on the Turin Horse from 2011. We'll be back next month with another episode. Don't forget to check out our multiple socials and ways to interact with us. This will include our email as well at linktr.ee/vegan Voidcast. That's a goodbye and happy new year. I mean, you'll probably be listening to this in the new year, but I hope 2024 provides you some relief.
All right, then take care.